Although most people think of ghosts as the spirits of the departed, ghostly activity can mean something entirely different. In this two-part series, we delve into different types of hauntings. For part 1, we're covering everything from telekinesis to residual energy. Welcome to Shadowland, everybody.
Welcome.
This is a podcast that shines a spotlight on stories of the supernatural, mysterious, eerie, and unexplained. Stuff like zombies,
Gnomes,
the Lake Superior shipwreck region,
vortexes,
echoes from the past,
chimera,
ghost cars,
human-pig hybrids,
Mothman,
interdimensional beings,
doppelgangers,
jinns,
creepypasta,
time travel,
past lives, all that good stuff.
all that kind of stuff, and more.
And more. So today we're kicking off a two-parter and we're talking about ghosts. It's Spooktober.
Yep, we're going to do a whole thing about all what we see as like the whole sort of spectrum of ghost and paranormal activity.
Yes, because ghosts aren't just dead people.
No.
I mean, they can be.
Too, but they can be. But they can be lots of other things, including not ghosts at all.
Right.
So we're gonna get into all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe we'll start with an overview. Oh, maybe first we should introduce ourselves. Did we do that?
Oh, we didn't do that, but let's do it. I'm Christina Calorie.
And I'm Seth Jablon, and we're about to talk about ghosts.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah. So we're gonna do it from the point of view of this sort of like categorization. I mean, I've heard different kinds. This is sort of my telling of it, but there's certainly other ways to categorize all this type of phenomena.
Seth's ghost type.
This is my
TM.
Yes, yes, Seth's ghost type. Yeah, so it's like I mean, this is definitely not like some sort of like scientific or attempt to create an objective measurement, but it's just more like a gradation of like supernatural phenomena just from a relative point of view, right? Which is like the human experience, right? So there's all this stuff that happens out in the world that we can't really, place into our worldview. But there's all these different origins of what this activity could be. And so we're going to sort of like get into those and, give some examples. So.
Right. Cool. And it all gets lumped in to ghosts a lot of times. People,
yes.
Oh, it's a ghost. It's a haunting.
Right. Yeah. And maybe sometimes there are more than one thing. So this categorization isn't even like a distinct, sort of discrete categories. It's just sort of like a gradation of like, the level of weirdness and like explainability of things, I think. Okay. Cool. So I'm just going to give a quick overview and then we'll go sort of category by category.
Cool. Yeah. And we're doing a two-part. So the next episode will cover the rest of them. But for this one, maybe we should just tell people we're doing atmospheric, poltergeist, and residual.
Yep. So just taking a step back for a second, like before we get into the categories, like maybe we just like put out there what we mean by paranormal phenomenon, like, and what would we call specifically stuff that's sort of like evidence of ghosts or spirits or something unnatural or supernatural. So it could be things like, objects moving on their own, apports, I'm not sure how you say that, which is like objects appearing and disappearing on their own. Shadows without origin, unexplained sound, disembodied voices, ghostly figures, scratches,
even smells,
bruises,
like fragrances. Yeah,
totally. Spectral phenomenon, and that could be like stuff that's specifically light, and then also figures, strange presences, shadow people. Sudden coldnesses is a big one. Even dream visitations of loved ones or of spirits and demons in your dreams, and so. All these sort of like...
We need to do a whole thing on that one.
Yeah, totally. So that's sort of like an overview of what we're going to talk about. And then in terms of the categories, you mentioned them already. So category 1 is sort of what we're calling atmospheric activity, and this could be sort of electromagnetic stuff. Category 2 is sort of like maybe the first order of like sort of poltergeist activity, right? And maybe it has a more sort of living origin. And then category 3 is sort of what we're calling echoes or residuals of human activity. Category 4 would be human souls, right? And there's a wide range there. And then category 5 would be non-human entities. And so each of these categories probably gets more and more, wide in terms of all the types of things that could cause that type of phenomenon. And then again, there's probably a lot of people have a lot of experiences that might incorporate more than one. And we'll get into that, like how one of these phenomena can kind of set off the other. So that's a good look at what we're going to be talking about. I guess we'll maybe just jump right into the first category, which is atmospheric activity.
Cool.
So this is something that I think it's basically just natural phenomena that we either don't understand or in the process of understanding or even do understand at this point, right? Electromagnetic fields, things like St. Elmo's fire or ball lightning, stuff like that. Maybe even, that electric fog that we talked about in the time travel episode, just any of these like weird natural occurrences that, create odd lights, disturbances in time and perception. But it's not like some sort of entity or that it even possesses an intelligence of its own, right? It's
it's not supernatural. It could be, I guess. It's still unexplained, but probably not.
Right. It's just like kind of super weird. And it has like a sense of like causing a ripple or current or, something like that. So
yeah, my grandfather actually saw ball lightning. There was a cool story in my family about that.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool.
It came into the window and it was like this sphere and it sort of just like moved around and exited.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and I feel like there's other like ball lightnings. Maybe we'll do one about ball lightning or gnomes, like a whole episode, because there's even ones where it's like it like turns into a thing, like I think I heard one story where like this ball lightning came in and like turned into a gnome, and I just thought that was like
that's not ball lightning.
That's not ball
anymore.
Lightning, yeah. But yeah. So I mean, with this one, I don't have a specific story, but there's some examples of that stuff. And so, for instance, St. Elmo's fire would be an example of this sort of first category, right? It's actually like a weather phenomenon. And so this is a bunch of Wikipedia stuff. Basically, it's a luminous plasma that's created by a corona discharge from a sharp or pointed object in a strong electric field in the atmosphere, right? Such as ones generated by thunderstorms or created by volcanic eruption. Right. So what it actually is, it's a bright or blue, violet glow. And it kind of appears like fire sort of shimmering, sort of like in the air. Right. Which I'm sure witnessing this would like seem pretty insane. Right. Like if you saw that, didn't know what St. Elmo's fire was, it'd probably freak you out. And you would probably actually think it had some sort of supernatural origin, which is why it's called St. Elmo's fire. So so it's actually named after Saint Erasmus of Fornina, also called Saint Elmo, and this is the patron saint of sailors. So back in the day, this phenomena would sometimes appear around ships at sea during thunderstorms, and so when sailors saw this, they thought this was like kind of a religious experience for them. And they thought they were actually witnessing, St. Elmo visiting them or watching over them. And so it was generally a good omen to see this. And just some examples in modern times of this happening. So it was St. Elmo's fire was seen during the 1955 Great Plains tornado outbreak in Kansas and Oklahoma. It was observed in its full sort of optical spectrum. It was recorded during a University of Alaska research field flight over the Amazon in 1995, when they were studying sprites, which is a whole like type of lightning activity, I guess. And then Tesla actually created St. Elmo's Fire in 1899 in his laboratory in Colorado Springs while he was testing out a Tesla coil. So it was actually, St. Elmo's Fire was seen all around the coil, and it was said to have lit up the wings of the butterflies with blue halos as they flew around, which is crazy, right? Crazy. What a crazy sight. So, those are some examples of St. Elmo's Fire. Do you have an example or story about?
I do. This is one that I learned about recently, and it's called the Hestelin lights.
Huh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and I apologize, I didn't look up the pronunciation. Next time I'll be better at that. But for the past century, strange lights have been reported in the sky over Hestelin Valley, which is in central Norway, and it's in a very rural area. And it's in this one location. And basically they're described as glowing orbs, and they hover. They're like flashing balls of light, but what's really interesting is that their appearance is pretty varied. So you don't only see them in one way. So they can show up day or night. They seem to float above the valley, but they can also move through it like at really high speeds, like they're racing through. Wow. They can hover there and be static, or they can kind of like sort of undulate or like move back and forth super slowly. They're either white, yellow, or red in color. And they can show up for, different periods of time. So it can be kind of instantaneous, or they can be there for like a long time, like over an hour, I think they've been reported for. Wow. Yeah. So there was like a peak sighting period from around December of 1981 until about mid-1984. And at this point, there were about 15 to 20 reported sightings every week. Wow. So, yeah, obviously word got out, and the sightings attracted attention, and tourists flocked to the area hoping to catch a glimpse. Reports tapered off after that. And at this point, only around 20 are reported every year, but it still goes on. And because these sightings have been so frequent, and sometimes they're so long in duration, obviously you can document it and you can study them. And they've been taken seriously by researchers and not just brushed off. So scientists, electrical engineers, students have all been part of groups that have attempted to study them and figure out what's going on. A few of these groups are the UFO Norway and UFO Sweden's Project Hestelin, something called the Triangle Project, and a project named EMBLA that included researchers from Osvold University College and the Italian National Research Council. But the thing is, nobody knows what they are still. But there are some theories. So here are a few of the theories. Of course, like, some discount the lights as just like prosaic natural phenomena, like some kind of a mirage effect, like the reflections off car headlights or aircraft, etc. If I've seen some videos of these, and it really doesn't. I mean, that's just such a lame, that's not what it is. That's not. I mean, I don't know. But so there was a Norwegian scientist, Christian Opdahl. I apologize, Norwegian people, posited in 2016 that they're caused by the collision of cosmic ray particles. Huh. Interesting. Kind of, I mean, I don't know. It feels sort of Aurora Borealis-y.
Yeah. Right.
But given the location and... So one scientist attributed it to the types of minerals in the area. There's a lot of zinc, iron, and copper. And there's also like a river that flows along. So the interaction could have created, according to him, like this ionized gas and these bubbles that react with the atmosphere in the valley, which is humid, and created the lights, maybe. I don't know.
Interesting.
Also, the geology in the area possibly could create an electromagnetic field. Another hypothesis says that it's a product of, I don't know how to pronounce this, piezoelectricity, which is generated under specific rock strains because many crystal rocks in Hesselen Valley include quartz, and that produces an intense charge density.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but it has to do with the quartz, and it, interacts somehow and creates this effect.
Right.
And then some people just think it's supernatural or aliens.
Right.
But the hope is that if you can figure out the natural phenomena that's causing it, that there could be some kind of energy there that could be something untapped that we could use.
Right.
But they still don't know what causes them. And
It's
there are
really
some cool
interesting.
videos out there.
Yeah, I mean, Tesla believed in the whole like 0-point energy field, right? That if we just had the right type of equipment, essentially, that you could tap into this energy that's around us all the time. That there's a energy that the Earth generates, and he was even able to create some like wireless. I think he even made like wireless cars, right? Didn't he have like a tower in Long Island or something? But just this idea that there's all this energy and electricity and stuff moving through the air, and we don't really understand it. But if we could, that could be such a different relationship with energy for us. I don't know. There's something interesting about that to me.
For sure.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're off to a good start here. So yeah, I think maybe we'll talk about category 2, which is poltergeist activity. Now, obviously, there's many different types of poltergeists. I'm just using that word as like a stand-in. Obviously that word means noisy ghost. And I think there can be actually like noisy ghosts of kind of like most of these categories we're going to talk about. So in this category, we're mostly talking about a certain kind, right? And it often has a telekinetic quality to it, right? Like plates flying off a shelf, knocks and noises and just activity like that seems very sort of intense to all the way to violent.
Right. Yeah. People actually get attacked.
People get attacked.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something animal-like about this energy or sort of sprightly. I don't exactly know, but but there's a lot of discussion right now, like in the sort of like paranormal, parapsychological world about this type of phenomenon. There's a whole set of theories around this being actual stray energy of people. Right. And specifically pubescent teenagers, often girls, who are possibly going through a emotional period or something like that. But there's often a correlation between this sort of activity and a sort of like chaotic situation, an emotional or traumatic situation in a teenager's life. And so I don't know if that means this activity is being exacerbated by it or if it's actually them doing it. I think
I think a lot of people feel like it's somehow coming from them, that there's something about that time period in development. And if they have some kind of like latent psychic abilities or something like that, and the energy isn't controlled, and so obviously they're not aware of what's going on, but yeah.
Totally.
That's a theory.
Paranormal expert Lloyd Auerbach said that, maybe sort of unconscious bursts of psychokinetic energy is actually what we generally call poltergeist activity. And I feel like there's something to that. I really like the first time I heard that, I was like, wow, that's a pretty, crazy idea. But at the same time, it kind of makes sense. And so in the case of the San Pedro poltergeist, which I'm not going to do the whole story there, maybe in another episode, but it was a household with a young teenager, and they were plagued with this sort of violent telekinetic activity that continued even after they had moved. They had a teenager that was going through some pretty difficult stuff emotionally. And when they were able to sort of move past that or get to a better place, the activity stopped. And so what I thought was interesting about that example was they actually felt that way too. the actual people who were, I think maybe there's like a stepfather or father in the mix, and I'm not sure how the teenager felt about it, but there was definitely amongst the people that were affected by this phenomenon felt like that was actually, that was a possible option of what was happening. And so I think when you're actually in the moment experiencing this stuff, your perspective is pretty valuable, right? And so I don't know. I think there's something to it. I feel like we put out all types of energy, that we don't normally perceive, when someone likes us, like we kind of experience it. When someone doesn't like us, we kind of experience it. And so, having an influence on the world around us based off of like stray energy or something like that doesn't sound that crazy to me. Even the type of energy that can move objects, right?
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of put this in its own sort of category, which is like,
right.
Who knows? And so often, this is one that's also one that could be correlated with sort of other categories of phenomenon, right? Like there's definitely lots of examples of hauntings that get exacerbated by a person. Very often it can be a young person, or if someone engages it and it sets it off. And so, maybe this phenomenon, has another origin. Maybe it's simply a byproduct of some type of like psychic conflict.
I think some people attribute it to like demonic forces too, because a lot of times it's like, it's not, it's malevolent.
Yeah. It has a malevolent behavior or mischievous quality to it. Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, so did you have a story?
I do have a story. I do have a story, and mine is kind of textbook.
Okay.
It's the Great Amherst Mystery.
Ooh.
So it starts in 1878 with a young woman named Esther Cox. She was 18 years old, and she lived with her family in a small cottage in Nova Scotia, Canada. And one day, a family friend named Bob McNeil, who she apparently it was kind of hanging out with, she maybe had a crush on him or something like that. But anyway, he was a bad guy, and she didn't realize it, and he attempted to sexually assault her. One report I found said that he used a gun, so this was like an especially violent attack, and she was deeply traumatized by the experience. Her sisters witnessed her crying herself to sleep. They knew that she was depressed, but they didn't know at the time because she didn't tell them. She was, I'm sure ashamed or embarrassed. And so they just thought maybe, she'd had a falling out with him. But shortly after this attack happened, strange things began occurring in the cottage. So Esther shared a bed with her sister Jane. And one night, the sisters woke up their family members with screams. And people came running into the room, and the sisters had seen something moving under the covers. And Esther thought that it might be a mouse. So they searched, in and around the bed in the room, and they couldn't find anything. The next night, both of the sisters heard this strange rustling sound under the bed. And this really gives me the heebie-jeebies. But it sounded like it was coming from a little fabric box that was stored under there. So they took the box out from under the bed and put it in the center of the bedroom to open it up and check it out. Suddenly, the box jumped into the air by itself and landed on its side. So the girls set it back down again, and it did the exact same thing.
Whoa.
Super creepy.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the third night, the activity got way more serious. Esther started feeling sick and feverish, and so she went to bed early, and her sister came in and joined her later. And after a little while, Esther jumped out of bed and began tearing off her night clothes and exclaiming, "What's happening to me? I'm dying." And so her sister lit a lamp and saw that Esther's skin was bright red, and it looked like it was swelling up. So at this point, because of all the commotion, their other sister, who lived in the cottage, Olive, rushed into the room and saw what was going on. And Esther started struggling to breathe and like choking, and the swelling was getting worse. And the sisters are standing around watching, feeling helpless. I mean, it kind of sounds like an anaphylactic shock reaction, you know.
Huh.
But all at once, there was a sound that they described like a loud thunderclap that sounded like it was emanating from underneath the bed in that same area where the wrestling had started. And it was so loud that it shook the room.
Jesus, dude.
I know.
This is scary, dude.
I know. It is. It's Halloween.
Yeah.
Spooktober. So there were 3 more loud bangs that followed it. And after that, Esther's swelling started to subside and she was finally able to sleep. Wow. Okay. But this is just the beginning.
Oh, shit.
So Esther started to have spells where she went into trances and started having kind of like spasms or seizure type episodes. And during these times, she would say things that later on she wouldn't remember. And then the events gradually progressed from just Esther herself to the environment around her more and more. So blankets and pillows flew off the bed, and the family members would put them back on and they'd fly off again. And the events continued to grow. And so, like, up until now, the only eyewitnesses had been Esther, her 2 sisters, and then the other people that lived in the cottage. It was their brother, Olive's husband, and then a couple kids. So the family had no idea what to do. So they called a local doctor, whose name was Dr. Karit. He came by and witnessed the spectacle for himself. He heard the thunderclaps coming from under the bed. He saw Esther's pillow move all by itself, and he watched as her clothes were being thrown around the room all by themselves.
Wow, so this is like eyewitness account of...
Eyewitness account, yeah. And there were many others too. But at one point, he saw letters appeared etched into the wall above the bed that said, Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. Okay? So this is just like the first meeting. So the doctor came back the next day and recorded all these events that he witnessed, but he didn't know what to tell them. He didn't really have a solution. You know, this really wasn't, you know, he's a doctor. So along with all this stuff going on, there were also witnesses to what they called intelligent rappings, which were just like knocking in responses to questions. So they'd ask a question and there would be these rappings in response, you know?
Yep.
After a while, neighbors started noticing the phenomena. So the noises were so loud they could be heard by 200 yards away. Someone described it as sounding like someone was banging on the roof with a sledgehammer. And word started to spread about these crazy events at the cottage. And then, of course, people started gathering, hoping to catch a glimpse of something flying through the air or to be able to communicate with a ghost. Not everybody believed the stories. Some people were kind of, you know, hostile toward her and thought she was faking it. But Esther's symptoms were growing worse, and you know, the activity was stepping up. Objects were flying through the air in the cottage. Sometimes things seemed to materialize out of thin air. Stuff went missing only to reappear later in other places. Then Esther started to hear voices and even seeing entities appear that were harassing her.
Oh, shit.
And then she began to be physically attacked, even like scratched or slapped. And finally, fires started to break out for no reason in the cottage.
Holy shit. I've never heard of that one before. Wow.
Yeah. So life in these super close quarters of this little cabin, it was extremely chaotic and terrifying. And finally, after Esther claimed to have seen a ghost threaten to burn down the house unless she left, she moved out. So she was taken in by a local family who was kind enough to give her a job at their saloon. However, the phenomena followed her. So patrons of the saloon apparently witnessed all kinds of crazy activity around her. Once someone reported seeing a knife fly through the air and stab Esther in the back. And when someone pulled it out, it flew back into the same wound.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound like it was too deep because she was, fine and recovered. But still, I mean, that's insane.
That's terrifying. Yeah. Because you think of like ghosts, like, especially when it's like, I don't know, being pushed, or like some people like get pushed down the stairs or something. There's, sort of deadly there, but actually like getting straight up stabbed by a ghost.
I know.
That's like terrifying.
Yeah. It's a whole other level. So there were even more witnesses in this case. There were clergymen, scientists, doctors who were all consulted. There was a Baptist minister. His name was Dr. Edwin Clay. He investigated it, and he stated that Esther wasn't creating the events herself. So he sort of defended her to the public and people who were questioning whether or not she was faking it. Esther went to St. John, New Brunswick to be investigated by a group of scientific type guys. I'm not sure what kind of scientists they were, but apparently they determined that a number of ghosts were haunting her. And in June of 1879, an investigator and author whose name was Walter Hubble spent 6 weeks in Esther's home and witnessed a whole bunch of stuff taking place himself firsthand. So this included fires mysteriously starting, objects moving and appearing out of nowhere, all when Esther was right there in front of him and couldn't have been behind the scenes faking it. He also witnessed her being attacked, and the attacks ranged from like being stuck with pins to extreme swelling spells like the first one. And then later that year, he published a report about it, and then he went on to write a book and publish that, and that was called The Great Amherst Mystery. And in the book, Hubble included 13 affidavits by witnesses who claimed that they'd seen these unexplained things take place. So Hubble, there was a brief period of time where he talked her into going on tour to give talks and do speaking engagements and share her story. That didn't go well. Not long into the tour, she was heckled and a disturbance broke out, and so the tour was canceled. So after that, she moved back home to Amherst, and she started working for a man named Arthur Davison. His barn burned down, and he accused her of arson. And she was actually convicted and spent 4 months in prison, or she was convicted and sentenced to 4 months in prison, but she only served 1. So this is interesting, but after her release, the phenomena started to fade away and then finally stopped entirely. She
after her release from jail,
from prison,
yeah,
from prison, yeah. So she married twice. She had 2 sons, one by each husband, and then she died on November 8th, 1912, at the age of 52. After her death, there were more inquiries into the case. One researcher had taken statements from the surviving witnesses and published the results that came out in 1913. And then in 1919, a skeptical report came out that kind of viewed Esther as, a trickster, but while in a dissociative state. So I'm not sure if that kind of, opened it up to the possibility that maybe she wasn't entirely conscious of committing trickery. But to this day, it still remains a mystery.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. I mean, that's some really intense stuff happening to you. It's being in that household. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And so the thing that set this whole thing off was
the attack.
The attack.
Yeah, and she was 18. Yeah,
she was 18.
And so it was an extremely traumatic experience. If you can imagine someone that you're, kind of into, and then all of a sudden they attack you in this horribly, violent way. I mean, it would be super traumatic, and yeah, I don't know.
Totally. Wow, that's crazy. But then it was also sort of malevolent towards her, which is also interesting, right? It didn't seem to be pointed out. It was pointed at her.
Right. Though, I mean, I think a lot of times this happens. People who are victims, especially women, can kind of internalize that and turn that on themselves and blame themselves.
Interesting, yeah.
And depression is kind of like that anger turned inward because it's so ineffectual, you feel like you can't do anything about it.
Right. Wow, interesting. Yeah. Well, that was a pretty good story. I didn't see that. I mean, there was a lot happening in it. And yeah, I feel like I said earlier, it's like sometimes that phenomena is like, I don't know, sometimes they're connected. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't know, what exactly is going on here, like what, but somehow, like, I don't know, things can make other things happen, I guess. I don't know. Cool. All right. So category 3. And this we're calling echoes of human activity. And so this is like residual human experience, human emotion, human activities that get sort of like stuck in a place. So it's not what we would call an actual like ghost, right? It's something more like a reverberation.
Yeah, there's not a consciousness behind it.
There's not a consciousness
It's supposedly
behind it.
like an imprint.
Yeah, like an imprint. And it has to do with, human emotion, I think a lot, like places where people either suffered a lot or were very happy, or some places that sort of matter to people in a certain way. But usually there's some type of negative or bad feelings or can be absorbed into the sort of organic matter or just based on what's there can make it more conducive to energy sort of sticking around, these echoes sort of getting trapped there, right? So these could be like, man-made structures, wooden structures, it could be, a cave, it could be a very specific place. Like, for instance, we've talked about this before, but like you go visit Auschwitz and that's enough to verify that this category exists, right? Like you can feel something happen there. The ground is sort of stained with it,
Yeah.
The trees almost seem to have absorbed it. And so, and that can cause all types of phenomena, for everything
Right.
from just a nascent feeling.
Have you experienced that yourself?
What's that?
Have you experienced that yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, going to Auschwitz. I mean, like, I definitely
Yeah.
felt like you go there and like
Right.
you go into some of these rooms where it's like really heinous stuff went down and you feel it. You feel something
Right.
bad happen there.
When I was in my 20s, I went to the site of a World War II battle in Germany, and I stayed overnight there, and I had nightmares all night long.
Oh shit. Okay. Like violent.
Violent.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think it's like stuff like that. And like it can express in totally different ways, right? Give people like horrible dreams. It could be, you could actually see visions of people, stuff like that. And so, the example I was going to give here was, the story of the Stanley Hotel. Do you know anything about the Stanley Hotel?
I don't.
Okay.
Tell me.
Cool. So, Freeland Oscar Stanley built and opened the Stanley Hotel in 1909. And he did this on a scenic site in Colorado's Rocky Mountains. So it was basically created as this resort for upper class Easterners. And it was like kind of a health retreat, right? For sufferers of pulmonary tuberculosis, right? So at that time, a lot of people who had tuberculosis, one of the things they were prescribed was to go off and stay in places with this sort of great air, right? And so that area was seen to be as like a very restorative place to be, right? And I think Mr. Stanley actually had tuberculosis as well, and so the whole thing was a part of his recovery. So in 1974, it was sort of, I think he actually did get better and spend much of the rest of his life there. So fast forward to 1974. While they were living in Boulder, author Stephen King and his wife stayed at the Stanley in what is now the famous room 217. So he spent the night hanging out at the bar. I think he was like drinking a lot at that point. I think he like had a bunch of whiskeys, but on his way back to his room, he actually came across two girls standing in the hallway, even though no one else was staying in the hotel. Right. And so, he knew like,
Sounds like The Shining.
Well, yeah, it was the inspiration for The Shining. I'll get to that. But yeah, basically, I think they had like dinner there and like there was like these massive tables set up and there's like literally no one there. I think maybe they went on off season or something. I don't know exactly why they were the only people there, but he definitely had like a bunch of experiences. And yeah, seeing the girls was one of them. I think he heard some voices or something. But that night, he actually had a series of awful nightmares about his son being chased by a fire hose.
A fire hose?
Yeah. Like chasing him down the hallway, and it was like alive and coming after him, basically. So, he woke up and, he found the dream deeply disturbing. And if you ever hear him recount it, there's something definitely emotional about this whole experience for him, right? Like he definitely felt it as a sort of unsettling and paranormal experience. And as the story goes, after he awoke, he lit a cigarette, and by the time the cigarette was done, he had the bones of The Shining written. So afterwards, he finds out that the room he stayed in actually had its own story, right? So in 1911, the Stanley was powered by gas lighting. During a severe storm, the power was lost. And I think maybe the lights went out and maybe there was gas was going or whatever, but a maid named Elizabeth Wilson entered the room with a lit candle, and there was a huge explosion, right? And that actually like blew open the room, and she fell through the floor. Luckily, she only broke her ankle, so she actually lived. But she lived on, but many believe that she actually returned there at the end of her life because she had these strong memories of the place. So guests that stay in that room will report that their belongings will become unpacked during their stay. Right. And I thought that was like interesting. Like it's a maid. It's like she's just trying to be helpful. Yeah, totally. Object or just this idea that she wants them to stay is kind of interesting. Objects will move around and they will hear disembodied voices of a woman. Some have claimed to even see an apparition of a person walking, exiting through a wall where there was once a doorway. Right. So one of the theories around this is that Stanley Hotel rests on a bed of quartz and limestone, which some people believe this is actually like kind of what helps these sort of energies or spirit or whatever, this residual human energy stick around, right? That it's like somehow conducive to this type of phenomenon sort of echoing through time. So obviously this is just one theory, but it's an interesting thought that that's what is sort of causing us, right? Because it's not, a lot of this does sound like echoes. And if you ever even read The Shining, or I don't think the movie's a little different, but the original book, it is a lot more about, I think there's there's a lot more about the sort of these ghosts that have just sort of stuck around. It's just on repeat. It's just playing over again. Because there's a bunch of activity that's happening there as well, right? So Freeland Oscar Stanley has also been sighted throughout the hotel. There's phantom piano music that's heard being played in the music room, in the concert hall. There's apparitions that are seen on the grand staircase. Several photos of a woman dressed in turn-of-the-century garb have been captured on those steps. The fourth floor is also said to be quite haunted. And there's ghostly sounds of children, even when the children are not around. And this is my favorite one. Room 428 is also said to be haunted by the ghost of a cowboy that watches you sleep from the foot of the bed. Oh, that's so creepy, but just as like
it's creepy yet like kind of charming.
Kind of charming, right? And so I mean, obviously, like room 217, which I think in the film was changed to 237 or 247, right? Like that's the in the Kubrick film. That was at the request of the Stanley Hotel so that they wouldn't have to change the room name. But yeah, the original room was 217, and that's sort of now sort of lives on in infamy because of sort of Stephen King's relationship to it and the whole story. And but yeah, even other than that, it has its own sort of life as a paranormal destination. So yeah, that's the story of the Stanley Hotel.
That's so interesting, and I learned something new. I had no idea that it was based on true events.
Yeah, and like I said, I couldn't find it. I was looking for it, and I couldn't find it, but I know I read an account or listened to an account, maybe an interview where he talks about it, and it's like it was an emotional event for him. It was kind of this big moment where he was trying to write this story, but just it had a really strong impression on him, and a lot of that I think definitely comes through in The Shining, in the book at least.
Wow. So are these strictly residual, do you think, or are there intelligences attached?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like it is sort of residual. I don't know how you'd really, to be honest, like tell the difference, like if you're actually like experiencing phenomena, to be like, oh, well, this is this kind. Like,
well,
but
supposedly one of the hallmarks is that the ghosts do not engage with you in any real way. It's just like they kind of do. There's like this repetition. I guess that
would be
like this obsessive repetition, or it's almost like these events are being played out again and again and again.
I think it's more that.
On loop. Yeah,
I think it's that.
Okay.
I think it's a loop of some kind, and I think. I think that's probably what's happening there. I think there are some, like, you can get it to happen, but in terms of like, doing the knocking thing or, actually engaging this thing, I think with like a lot of the poltergeists, there's always an escalation, so these things are obviously not escalating, they're just sort of hanging out. And I think that's maybe a distinguishing factor.
Wow. Cool. Those are great.
Cool. So do you have a story for this one?
I do. I'm really excited about this one. And there's a little bit of synchronicity here because my story also has tuberculosis. Anyway, I write poetry, and when I was a teenager, I got like around 18, 19, I got really, really into the Romantic poets, and my favorite has always been John Keats, who was this beautiful genius. It just wrote these amazing poems, and he died tragically at the age of 25 of tuberculosis. And just one cool aside, he coined the term negative capability, and his definition of that kind of relates to this podcast because it's the ability to dwell in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts without any irritable reaching after facts and reason.
I love that. I like that.
I love that. Yeah. So anyway, I had like I'm just going to tell this kind of a weird personal story to open up the bigger one.
Okay.
So when I was like around 19 or whatever, I remember discovering one of his poems, and it's called Isabella, which has a ghost in it, and it's just beautiful. And I was so caught up in it after reading. I was weeping. It's such a beautiful poem. And I went to bed with all this poetry swirling around in my head that night. And I remember looking out into the hallway from my dark bedroom, and the hallway was lit up, and for like a second, I thought I saw this like shadowy outline of someone standing there, and I had this sense that it was Keats' spirit.
Oh, wow.
I mean, somehow, I highly doubt that Keats would be hanging out in this beige carpeted hallway of a townhouse in Downriver, Detroit. Kind of like, but you never know.
I don't know,
anyway,
dude, I think that's a genuine experience.
I remembered this. It stuck with me. So anyway, I was fascinated to find this story.
Okay.
Just as a little bit of backstory about Keats, when he was a doctor, and so he knew when he became ill what the signs were of TB. He knew that he was going to die. He went to Rome because the weather was a lot better than in England. And just for a chance to try and recuperate with some better weather and clean air. But he died less than a year later in 1821, and the whole time he lived in a house there. He was buried in the Protestant cemetery of Rome, and the grave inscription reads, "Young English poet," with this really heartbreaking "Here lies one whose name was writ in water" beneath it. But anyway, after he died, most of his belongings were burned to prevent spread. That was the law at the time.
Right.
But the house itself that he stayed in was bought by an American poet who turned it into a museum in 1905. So they've got a lot of manuscripts there. They've got like the bed. They've got the whole room set up. And there's even like his desk mat his death mask somewhere there. So Keats' ghost has been reported numerous times by museum goers who've seen him in the house. And I'm filing this one under the residual hauntings. But I really hope that it's actually him.
Right.
Because this is a super cool story. So, okay. So one encounter in particular resulted in this inspiring work of art. In 1911, the American sculptor Melvina Hoffman visited the house and had this incredible encounter with his apparition. And here's what she said. I found myself in the room where the poet died. Something inexplicable happened. I had a startling vision of Keats. I saw him steadily and clearly, reclining on a couch and propped up with pillows. So I did what seemed natural. I told the guide I was an artist and asked him if he could give me a piece of paper, as I had not brought my sketchbook. And I persuaded him to leave me alone in the room for a while and not admit anyone else. And I began to draw the profile of the poet. I did the entire head on the gray square of paper, and then thought that it would be well to check the absolute accuracy of this profile by getting a fresh view. When I walked in front of what I imagined was there, the vision disappeared. So she was able to sketch his face while she was sitting there. This image, or vision or apparition, whatever it was, stayed there. And then only when she tried to approach it, it finally disappeared.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So afterwards, she says that I showed the drawing to the guide, and he seemed surprised and impressed. There was actually no couch in the room, and neither he nor anyone else later was able to tell me where the couch had been in Keats's time. So she saw a couch that didn't actually exist.
Oh, right. Interesting.
And then she also said, I have a growing conviction that some power had directed me and that my drawing was an exact likeness. I never changed it. Those who had made a careful study of Keats' portraits and knew best what he may have looked like were impressed by the resemblance. So, after returning to her home in New York, she used her sketch to sculpt a life-sized bust in marble, and it took 14 years to complete.
Holy shit.
I know.
Some dedication.
Talk about a labor of love. So in 1923, Hoffman was in Pittsburgh for the opening of a retrospective of her work at the Carnegie Museum of Art. And during the opening, she saw the University of Pittsburgh Chancellor John Gabbert Bowman actually speaking to this bust. And he was like apparently reciting Keats's poetry to it.
Wow.
So like he was feeling this like intense, connection. And so she just assumed that he had some kind of similar spiritual encounter with Keats, and she donated the bust to the university. And I compared pictures with his death mask, and it really looks so much like his face, only it has this kind of a pleasant, transcendent expression. It's almost like a smile. But so yeah, it's actually, there's like a bust of Keats' ghost in existence.
Wow, that's really
Which
cool.
is pretty amazing to me.
Yeah. I want this to be the next category too. Like, I mean, I like that, there's, this house sort of being, whatever's happening there in terms of like whatever residual energy or ghost or not ghost, but just this idea that this person had this very personal experience with him, and they're whatever actually happened there, you can't deny that, right? Like whether or not you're like, oh, what was that actually? Right. Like even if it was their subconscious that sort of like there's still a connection,
picked up on all of these little fragments of information she had and kind of like created this vision. But something happened. It's still genius. It's amazing.
Interaction with you know what I mean? The memory of someone like that.
Yeah.
Like I've had those experiences too with people who are long gone, artists and writers and stuff. We can have that experience of like feeling connected in a way that, is very personal and very real, and whether it's a ghost or not is almost like kind of irrelevant on that level, Do you know what I mean? Like, she didn't need to know what exactly happened to create that work of art. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that does it for this first part. Do you feel good about what we got here?
Yeah, I feel pretty good.
Okay, cool. So we will continue to the category 4 and 5 on our next episode.
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, I guess until next time.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Shadowland Podcast is produced by Seth Jablon and Christina Callett. Edited by Tim Kelly. Theme music by Tim Lincoln.
Thanks, Tim.